In this Python for Beginners video, we're going to go back to our average test score exercise, and this time we'll be validating the input of the user to try and avoid any errors from occurring. And we're going to be using if, elif, else statements, and we're also going to use continue and break statements to affect the loops that we're using. Now just keep in mind, this may take a couple videos, so this may be part one of a number of videos. To begin this, I'm going to show you a finished product of kind of what we're aiming for. Now this may not be perfect yet, but we're going to test it out here. And the idea here is that if we don't enter anything at all, it's going to prompt us to enter a valid number since we didn't enter anything. And it's repeating. It's saying, okay, enter test score 1 because you didn't do it. And I'm still ignoring the prompt and just not entering anything. And after 4 tries, it doesn't let me do anything else. That's because we have a for loop and it's only giving us 4 attempts. Now we're going to change that eventually, but we'll stick with the for loop for now since that's how we ended things with average test score in our previous video. Another scenario here that we could look at is if we, instead of entering nothing and just hitting return, what if we enter a letter? If we just, instead of a number, we enter a G. And same thing happens. It says, please enter a valid number. And then we can. And then after you do that, we can put in a 9 or something, and it lets us continue. And notice as we're going along here, it's calculating things as we go, which is okay. We're going to do that for now. And then for number 2 here, I'm going to do an 8 out of 10. And then number 3, I'll do a 5 out of 10. And then it stopped then. It only stopped after 3 attempts. That's because we used up our first attempt by not entering a valid number. So we entered a G there. So it still only gives us 4 attempts. So we're going to have to fix that, and we'll use a while loop to fix that. That actually won't be that difficult. Validating everything else will take a little bit more time. So that's where we're going here. We're trying to validate anything the user might put in. They might put in a letter, they might put in nothing. They may start to enter grades and then want to stop. And the last scenario also is, let's say they want to stop. Let's say you don't have 4 grades. Or just for example, let's say, we're not limited and you could just put in as many as you want. They need to stop at some point. So what you can do, let's say you had 2 grades. They got a 9 out of 10, and then we got an 8 out of 10, and that's it. That's all they did. And it gives you your average so far, but let's say you're done here. You can type in quit or some kind of keyword, and it'll say entry stopped. What it does do is you could go back to your previous one, and then it says 2 tests is 85%, and entry stopped here. So at least it gives you some kind of prompt that we actually stopped and we weren't entering any more grades. So this is where we're going to go with this. We're going to pick up where we left off with our previous video. I named this file grades validate, but it's the one we were doing with a condition, and I'm kind of starting it right where we ended it, even though we are going to change some things here. So this is where I'm going to start with a file called grades validate. And it was from the last one where we basically just added this stuff in it. We added these letter grades. So what we're going to do now is we're going to start getting in here to the inputs and changing those or adding if-else statements so that we can validate the user input. Now the first step here is to kind of look at what we have and try to break it and see how we can fix it. So let's go back to this one, and this was again the one from the last video. And I'm going to just run this, and we'll see what happens if you enter nothing and you get an error. And it's actually important to look at the error message because it's having a problem with int. It doesn't mind that you didn't enter anything. What bothers the Python code is that it's trying to do math with nothing in here. You didn't do anything yet. So it's saying invalid literal for int. So it's having problems with the int. So we may get rid of this because if we want to enter quit to stop it, we can't have it be converted to an int right away. So we may convert that int later on as we go. So we may just take a string first and then worry about converting it to an int later. That way if someone types in quit or someone types in a letter, we could kind of validate that without worrying about it drawing an error because it's looking for a number. So a couple of those things we'll deal with. We'll worry about the test score first, that input, and then we'll deal with the possible points. So let's get started with this as much as we can. Like I said, I'm going to get rid of the int to start. We're going to do that later. And then after this, and I'll just put a couple returns here, and because I'm not worried about this stuff yet. I just want to focus on test score. And what I want to do is put in an if-else statement. I'll start off with if, and I'll say if test score equals equals, remember we have to use equals equals to test equality, we're just going to put in an empty string, which is just quotes with nothing in it. That's an empty string. So I'll put a colon here, and then I'll hit enter. Now it's indented, which is the way it should be inside this if-else statement. Notice that we're inside a for loop, and we're putting an if-else statement in there, so we're another level in. And now what's going to happen if they don't enter anything? Well, we want to print something out that says, please enter a valid number. Put an exclamation point, so we really mean it. Now, we can just end with that, except it won't do anything to bring us back to the beginning again. After we print this, please enter a valid number. What we want it to do, because if it did, it would just keep going and going through here. So we want to make sure that after we print a valid number, we get to start over. And since we're in a loop, we're in this for loop, what we can do is we could say continue. That's a statement that goes with loops. Here it is, continue. And that's all it says. And what that'll do is it'll just kind of go back to the beginning again. And we're going to use something called continue and something called break, which will actually break out of the loop if we don't want it to continue anymore. So let's start off with that first and see what happens. We're still going to get errors because we have ints down here and all kinds of stuff, but let's see what happens here. Now, one thing we don't have yet is we didn't convert it to an int yet, so we're still going to do that. So we'll put an else here. Now we have other conditions, but let's just say else. Let's say now we got the idea, we're going to put in a number. Let's just say else. Well, if you got else, meaning if you put in a number, and we're going to say we're going to do that, what we'll do here is we'll reassign our test score variable and make sure it's an int. We'll do it like that. And I'll start using these things. I keep forgetting to use these little helpers here. So this will convert it, and hopefully then once we continue on, it should work okay. At least for now. And again, we're taking this in steps. So we're only just kind of looking at if they don't enter anything. So let's see what happens here, just with this. Okay, I'm not going to enter anything. I'm just going to hit my enter key. It says, please enter a valid number. Now let's try 9 out of 10. And I'll try 8 out of 10. And I'll not enter anything. And it stopped because we only had 4 chances. But it actually worked. It gave us a grade of 2 tests because 2 of them we kind of entered nothing. So it only figured out 2 tests here, and it figured out 85%. So that's actually working. Now there's other things that a user could put in there. They could just put a letter. I just used the scenario where I just hit enter, but what if I put a letter instead of a number? So that's something else that we're going to have to consider here. And how do we figure that out? Well, we actually have something, we'll put an elif here. You might want to figure out how do you figure out if something's not a letter. And there's something called isDigit. And except you don't put equals equals isDigit. You actually put, it's actually like a function that tests if it's a digit. So we're going to put test score, and I should use these things. And I'm going to use dot isDigit. It's using a dot syntax, and we have to put parentheses after these. And then we're going to say if it's a digit, if it's not a digit. So that means we're going to say equals equals false. That's a Boolean, but we're going to say if that condition is false. We can't say not equals is digit. We have to say if this condition is false. And we still have to put a colon here. So if it's not a digit, what's going to happen? Well, same thing's going to happen. We're going to say continue, and you're going to say put a valid number because you're adding a letter. So let's see what happens here if that's the case. So this time I'm just going to add the letter J. It says please add a valid number. So that's working. It said that's not a valid number, and it continued. It used this continue statement again to start over again. Now if I hit nothing, it says please add a valid number, and let's see if I can add a number now. And I can continue. And test score 2, I'll do a 7. And that's all it lets me do, again, because we're only using a for loop in a range of 4. We can add to that if we want, but we'll eventually use a while loop so that we can give us unlimited attempts. And that's what happens. So that's actually working. And I think I'm gonna break this here after doing this and start a new video for the next part of this. Again, what we validated here is if they enter nothing with an empty string, and they'll get a message that says enter a new valid number, and a continue, which lets them input again. Same thing happens here if it says is digit equals false, that means it's not a number. That means they put in a letter, and in same situation, they get to start over and they get this message that says enter a valid number, and it continues. Okay, now another scenario we're going to have is if we break this thing, is if we want to stop, if the user wants to stop. And we'll do that in the next video. But this is working so far. And also one other thing to point out is that after they kind of get through these validations here, then it's like kind of, all right, now it's okay. Once it's okay, now we're converting it into an integer, and we're doing that because we have all this math coming up. So that's what's coming up next. On our next video, we'll kind of add one more condition to this. We'll add some conditions to the possible points as well. So that'll be in part 2.